I found the invoice on the kitchen table, folded like a note left by an enemy. My rent is now $900 a month, it read in Melissa's precise handwriting, plus utilities and a shared space fee, effective immediately. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The paper still smelled faintly of her perfume. I sat down hard enough that the chair protested, and the apartment answered with the small sounds of a marriage already hollow. She came in later that afternoon with a smile that did not include me and a man with an expensive laugh, and she called him Colin, the way people used brand names, deliberate, with the confidence of someone who believes friction is someone else's problem. "You agreed to this," she told me, as if the agreement had been signed by both our souls. "I need space for my client. He'll be here for design consultations." "I didn't sign any lease," I said. The words came out steadier than I felt. "We're married." "You are living in my apartment," she said. "Pay your share." I let it go that night. It was cheaper than arguing. I washed the dishes, put the invoice in my jacket, and went to sit with my father at the hospital. He was there, pale and stubborn, wired to a monitor that counted his breaths like a neighbor tallying fence posts. He smiled when I came in and said, "You look tired." "She started charging me rent," I told him. He blinked slow and practical. "Charge her back every cent," he said. "Make her refund it, and tell your lawyer." I didn't expect him to say that. He had the quiet muscles of a man who had built houses from beds of sod and had never needed to shout. When he speaks now, his sentences are the things he has learned to keep. "If someone tries to bilk you at home," he said, "you buy the ground under their feet." I called my lawyer that night. The voice on the other end was brisk and surprisingly cheerful, as if this were the mechanics of a large machine that still had a place for small righteous grievances. Papers were drawn. A refund demand was prepared. It felt ridiculous to spend money on counters for petty theft, but the money was never the point. It was the principle. It was the clean, surgical removal of an insult. In the morning, the bank transfer failed. Melissa's expression when that happened had all the hauteur of someone who owns a gallery and thinks the world should bow. "They'll clear by tonight," she said. But she was already planning dinner for a man who wore a smell I couldn't wear anymore. The smell of other people's money. I should have been angrier in public. Instead, I felt absurdly calm. I had not slept much in a week, but the loss came measured, like a technical problem to be solved. I had bills, schedules, a father to check on. I had a job that required precision. I decided precision would be my weapon. I watched her carefully. It is surprising how little it takes to notice the railings of deception once you are looking. She prepared the apartment for him. Cushions reoriented, art rearranged. He left sneakers by the doorway like a planted clue. I took pictures with my phone, not hacking, not breaking any law, just assembling the picture a rational person would want. When she began to call the amount rent to friends, I stopped smiling in the right places. The neighborhood started hearing stories about creative arrangements, and some of our old friends looked at me with an embarrassed sympathy that sat worse than anger. I could have given in. I could have paid and gone on. But when my father heard, lying pale and small under fluorescent hospital lights, something in him clapped like a trap closing. He called an old contact from his contractor days, a man with a firm handshake and a better sense of how paperwork moves. By the time I sat down with a cup of coffee the next day, the lawyer's email was waiting. The refund demand arrived with the kind of language designed to make people cough. Itemized lists, dates. Payment in full, it said, within 7 days. I left it on the counter like a landmine, then watched as Melissa read it, saw the color leave her face, then watched the color return as calculation met fear. She called Colin. She argued. I made coffee for my father and smiled at him like a man who had planted a seed and had nothing to do with the growing. Melissa paced our apartment like someone trying on a new suit that didn't fit. I could feel the apartment reorienting itself around a tension she hadn't meant to engage, the tension of consequences. That afternoon, as Colin drove away from our building, he left behind a leather jacket and a bottle of aftershave with its cap stuck halfway on. He was not subtle. He texted Melissa from the road. "Great weekend. Call me when you want to talk plans." He meant vacations, renovations, new addresses. He meant exile. I didn't file anything criminal. I filed facts. I gathered the bank statements, the transfers into Rusk Investments, the screenshots of invoices she had typed up and left in plain view. Lawyers like facts, they give them shape. They put them in a form that people who depend on public records know how to read. When the refund demand reached Melissa's inbox, she responded with something I had seen before: anger folded into strategy. "You will regret this," she typed, slamming the phone down like a hammer. "You can't make me give that back." "Watch me," I said, though she wasn't there to hear me. She tried to retaliate in the crudest ways she could imagine. Social media posts implying that I had become controlling and petty, texts to friends casting me as unreasonable. "They're on my side," she told me once, and I felt a loneliness that was not new but sharpened. My father, meanwhile, did what fathers with tools and history do. He wrote a check and had his lawyer arrange for it to be deposited. He did not want to humiliate Melissa with spectacle. He wanted the balance restored. He wanted my dignity to stand on a footing that couldn't be scoffed at. I refused the check. He insisted. "Let me buy the apartment," he said. "Let me hold the title. Then she can't use it as a chair in someone else's parlor." There are legal ways to do that. There are contracts and holding companies and quiet exchanges that look ordinary on paper. He did it methodically, without pageantry. By the time a week had passed, a notice arrived at the apartment, a transfer initiated. The property was, for all practical purposes, in escrow, held by a shell company that answered to my father's trustee. Melissa ran her fingers along the edge of the paper and turned it over as if it might bite. "You can't do that," she said, and now she sounded small. "I can," I said, and I did. From that day, the dynamic shifted. She was still the same person until the paperwork told her a different truth. The bank accounts that had once moved like private rivers were now visible canals with boats and buoys. The account that held the rent was frozen by a lawyer's order while auditors checked the origin of the transfers. She called that humiliation. I called it restoration. Her friends offered advice that ranged from sympathetic to faintly catty. "Maybe you two should take a break," one said at a party. I laughed and left early. I had already taken the break. The apartment at night was quieter than it had been in years. There were no more surprise dinners. There were no more neatly folded invoices. Then Colin began to lose his edge. The contractor who had loaned him a line of credit pulled back when he saw the files. An investor he had counted on for a facade renovation withdrew their offer. It was not a dramatic collapse. No buildings fell. No arrests were made. But for a man built on charm and borrowed money, losing faith is lethal in its own way. One evening, Colin came to the door furious, his shirt untucked, his face a worn map of bad nights. Melissa answered with an arrangement of words I recognized: blame, explanation, pleading. He shoved a handful of responsibility into her hands and then asked, like a child, to be sheltered from consequence. "You asked for space," I said, when they finally stood in the living room with the past laid between them. "You got it." He lunged at me then, mostly bravado, a human with no bedrock. I did what I had practiced, sidestepped. His momentum carried him into the coffee table. A lamp tipped, and the bulb shattered. He scrambled up like a frightened animal. There was a moment where every neighbor pressed faces to their windows and filmed with their phones. None of them saw the grace of avoidance. They only saw a man humiliated and a marriage that had become a stage. "Are you going to call security?" Colin asked, face slack with fury. "No," I said. "You need to leave." They left. The video of Colin's stumble circulated for a day and then two. then became a background noise that some people used as content to annotate their mornings. It stung Melissa, not because the public saw it, but because the public's gaze had turned practical. It no longer fancied her as clever. It found her petty. From the moment the title had shifted, from the day the trustee's name showed on the HUD, Melissa's options narrowed. She could rant, or she could reconcile. Her pride made the first choice for her. She began to speak in public the way someone flinging arms at storm windows speaks, loud, gesturing, but not reaching the bolts. Then something small and predictable happened. Melissa stomped into my father's room at the hospital. She wanted to make a scene, an ultimatum, a show of moral leverage. My father, who was connected to the world by thin membranes of patience and small indignation, listened to her voice and then, tired of noise, he signed the final waiver that made everything legal and final. He was old and deliberate, and when he used his weight, his acts were precise. "Refund every cent," he told her, "or you walk." She paid back the money. The transfer shows up on the bank ledger, entries like footprints. Then my father did something I did not expect. He transferred clear title of the apartment to me, launched through the holding company like a quiet blessing. "Keep it," he said. "Don't let anyone charge you rent in your own house." It was not revenge of the cartoon variety. No pyres, no torches. It was instead a recalibration of scales. When people try to monetize intimacy, the blunt instrument is usually money, the thing that measures worth in a world that pretends that worth can be balanced in checkbooks. He unbalanced her, and then balanced the ledger for me. Melissa's final defense came in the form of a conference call with her attorney, during which she threatened lawsuits and insinuated improprieties. Her words were sharp but flimsy. Paper proved heavier. She posted a long letter on her social feed about agency and personal boundaries and financial independence, phrases that had once swaddled our life. People read it and shared it. Some nodded like those who admire a neat argument. Most scrolled on. I kept my face public only when needed. I spoke to a few neighbors, signed a few forms, and walked my father back through the hallway of the hospital where he hummed like a thermostat. On the day Melissa's office called to say the firm was letting her go, due to reputational risk, the businessman said politely, I sat at their kitchen table and signed the final document transferring all responsibility for the mortgage and maintenance into my name. It felt absurdly normal, like fixing a leak. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and the quiet after an argument. She stood in the doorway and watched me sign. The man who had once called her a client later called to demand keys returned. I handed them to the lawyer. He left them on the table like a defeated animal. "You can't keep them," he said. "I didn't want them," I said. "I just didn't want you to profit from what you thought was a puppet stage." She laughed then, a sound more like a short circuit than a human noise. "You think you won?" she asked. "I think I leveled the floor," I said. "They say revenge is hollow. They say it doesn't feed you." That week I paid the back rent into the account and then closed it, moved our shared things into boxes, and watched the apartment change owners like a set being struck after a play. There was no revelatory shout, only a slow, clean administration of responsibility. On the way out of the building after the closing, Melissa pushed past me with an elbow and hissed, "You'll regret this." People heard. A woman on the sidewalk tapped her phone and recorded the moment. Someone else sent a thread to a local gossip page. Nothing real changed, but I stood still and felt the small, steady pulse of a man who had not been priced out of his own life. My father called that night, voice weaker, but steady. "You did right," he said. "You made them account for their small cruelties." "I didn't do it for you," I told him. "I did it for me." "Doesn't matter," he said. "Good bones." When the dust settled, I kept the apartment. I fixed the things that were flawed. I painted over the marks that had been left by other people. I kept my father's tools in the closet and never let them see them again. When friends asked how I felt, I told them the truth. Relieved. None of this was dramatic. It just got legal. There is a last thing that happened that I will not forget. Weeks after everything had been settled, Melissa tried to enter the building. The new locks did not know her. She stood there for a moment, on the stoop, a thin figure against the cold glass. Someone filmed her. She knocked. No one answered. A doorman leaned out and said, "Sorry, ma'am. You need to be on the tenant list." She screamed then, not a theatrical scream, but the raw sound of someone realizing that they had miscalculated their ground. The neighbors turned their heads. The camera phone angle was merciless. It was a small, humiliating image that suited her small ambitions. I walked out of the building behind my father, an old man steadying himself with a cane. He saw Melissa on the stoop and shook his head. "Bought the ground," he said. "Always buys better than ranting." I looked at Melissa for a long time as she stood outside in the cold with an animal's panic in her eyes. No song played, no thunder struck. The sky was a bland winter gray. But there was a rightness in the way things ended. Ledger balanced, claim revoked, dignity paid. I stayed on the stoop a moment longer, feeling the cold pinprick of winter on my face, and let the silence do its work. It was not spectacle I wanted. It was the small restoration of what had been bought and taken. When you own the ground, you get to decide who stands on it. I did. My father nodded, and I held the key a little tighter. I walked away with no vengeance on my tongue, only the quiet satisfaction of a balance sheet finally reconciled.